If you have a Bible and you like to read along, turn in it please to 1 Samuel chapter 25. This is where we're going to spend our time. 1 Samuel 25. If we could say, there are lots of things I think we can be really certain about as believers. And this is one of them that I am perfectly certain about. I don't even have a question. And it is that in terms of glorifying God here on the earth, I am going to fail a lot. I don't think that's just a guarantee. I think that's just intrinsic to who we are as fallen people. There's no way that we can escape it. The Christian philosopher J. Bud Zizuski says this. It's hard to pronounce, harder even to spell. We're so fallen we don't know how fallen we are. I think he's exactly right. We don't realize how deep it goes. We don't realize how many choices we make and how those choices are affected by the fact that we are fallen. Let's take a look at this text and see what we might learn about our fallen condition. 1 Samuel chapter 25, I'll begin reading in verse 2, and it's kind of a long reading, so sorry about that. There was a man in Maon whose business was in Carmel. This man was very wealthy. He owned 3,000 sheep and 1,000 goats. And at that time he was in Carmel having his sheep shorn. The man's name was Nabal and his wife's name was Abigail. She was both wise and beautiful, but the man was harsh and his deeds were evil. He was a Calebite, that is, he was a descendant of Caleb. When David heard in the desert that Nabal was shearing his sheep, he sent 10 servants to them and said, "Go up to Carmel and see Nabal and give him greetings in my name. Then you'll say to him, 'My brother Nabal, peace to you and to your house, peace to all that is yours.' Then you'll say to him, 'I hear that they are shearing sheep for you when your shepherds were with us. We neither insulted them nor harmed them the whole time they were in Carmel. As your own servants can tell you, may my servants find favor in your sight. For we've come at the time of a holiday. Please provide us, your servants and your son David, with whatever you can spare.' So David's servants went and spoke all the words to Nabal in David's name, and then they waited. But Nabal responded to David's servants, 'Who is David? And who is this son of Jesse? There's a time when many servants are breaking away from their masters. Should I take my bread and my water and my meat and the things that I've slaughtered for my shearers and give it to these men? I don't even know where they came from.' So David's servants went on their way, and when they returned, they came and told David all the things that Nabal's servants had said. Then David instructed his men, 'Each of you strap on your sword.' So each one strapped on their sword. And David also strapped on his sword. About 400 men followed David up, while 200 stayed behind with all of the equipment. One of the servants told Nabal's wife, Abigail, 'David sent messengers from the desert to greet our Lord, but he yelled at them. These men were very good to us. They never insulted us, nor did we sustain any losses of our flocks during the entire time we were together with them in the field. Both night and day they were a protective wall for us the entire time we were with them while we were tending our flocks. Now be aware of this and see what you can do, for disaster has been planned for our Lord Nabal and his entire household. He's such a wicked person, no one can tell him anything.' So Abigail quickly took 200 loaves of bread, 2 containers of wine, 5 prepared sheep, 5 seahs of roasted grain, 100 bunches of raisins, and 200 lumps of pressed figs, and loaded them all on donkeys. She said to her servants, 'Go ahead of me and I'll come after you.' But she did not tell her husband Nabal. Riding on her donkey, she went under the cover of the mountain. David and his men were coming to meet her, and she encountered them. Now David had been thinking, 'In vain I guarded everything that belonged to this man in the desert. I didn't take anything from him, but he's repaid my good with evil. God will severely punish David if I leave alive in the morning even one male from all those who belonged to Nabal.' Now, this is an interesting time in David's life, because this is not the only thing he's concerned about. He's being pursued by Saul as well. King Saul has lost his mind. The Spirit of God has left Saul. I think Saul could have been one of the greatest kings Israel had. But he chose a different path. He chose to be disobedient. And so God left him. And David is known to Saul to be the coming king, and so Saul is trying to kill him. So this is going on while this is all happening. If you go back and read the previous chapters, you can read about that. It's interesting to me that David doesn't retaliate toward Saul at all. That's very interesting to me. He returns the persecution of Saul with good. You remember Saul was in a cave and Saul was asleep. David crept in with a knife. Could have killed him right there on the spot and eliminated this problem, but he chose not to. He cut a piece of the robe off, came outside, called Saul's men out and said, see, I was there. I could have killed him, but I didn't. And so there's a sense in which there's a small side lesson for us in this. And I say this with great conviction. If any of us feels as though we should be civilly disobedient on account of being a believer, if you feel like God is calling you or me to disobey the civil authorities, you better be darn sure it's God calling you. Be darn sure before you do it. Well, here we find David and Nabal, and this is an interesting historical thing, to me it is anyway. If you read the text here without a knowledge of the history, it really looks very curious. What's going on? Why is David upset? What are they talking about? Well, you have to realize you had cities in the ancient world like Nineveh, or you had Jericho, or you had Ai. These cities were just tiny little places. Now, Nineveh was quite large. It had a 7.5 mile wall around it. But still, think about that 7.5 miles long. Reduce that by to a third, and you realize the city actually is quite small. Maybe the size of Waycross, actually, or smaller. And the cities were where a lot of people lived, but there were a lot of people who, like Nabal, kept flocks. They lived out. They didn't live in the cities. All right. This is a time in history, there's no police force whatsoever. If you live out in the hinterlands and you keep flocks, you're on your own. If you don't have your own private army, you're defenseless. So let's just say, for instance, with Nabal and his 4,000 head herd of goats and sheep, some person comes along there, a traveler perhaps, they're hungry, they see all these sheep, they say, well, tonight we'll go grab some. Who's going to stop them? Who's going to punish them? Who's going to catch them after they take the sheep? Nobody. There are no police out here. That's what this militia that David has gathered, 600 strong of fighting men, this is what they do. They protect people out in the wilderness for no charge. It's like, it's a crazy business plan, but that's what they do. And they because they're good at fighting, good at sword play, they've assigned themselves this task of going out and protecting all these people in these various places. I mean, the seat of the kingdom's too far away. Yeah, you get some sheep stolen. You go to the king, might take you 2-3 days to walk there, but the king says, you've lost some sheep. What am I supposed to do about it? That'd be the end of the conversation. They're not going to do anything. They're not going to send the army out there for you. So this is a really logical arrangement that this was very common in the ancient world. If a bunch of people were good fighters, good military people, they would gather up, become a militia, and then they would choose to protect certain areas, and then they would come to the people they had protected. And then it was known, it was understood. Everybody understood this arrangement. Nabal did too. And they would come and say, can you help us out? And they would usually be given food as provisions. They weren't paid, they were just sustained. After all, let's take it as a case in point here. If you don't need food, you really don't have to have any money, right? If all your needs are met, who needs money? So that's how they were paid. Well, David, in spite of this being such a great military man, David is also running for his life at the same time, because Saul does have an army. Saul does have people who can chase David down. He's got a fear of something that he knows is there that's real while he's doing this other thing. For all his bravery, David is afraid. Otherwise, he wouldn't run. We're afraid of stuff all the time. I mean, I think about these people in Turkey. Can you imagine You're just here minding your business, and all of a sudden the earth underneath your feet begins to shake to such a degree that your house caves in on top of you. That's a fear, right? I remember, I say this, I can say this with, I guess, reverence. My mom, after she retired, she became a fearful person. She stayed in the house all the time. She came to our house to visit Jackson and bring him a Hot Wheel a couple of times a week. But she did not go out and do things much because she was, and she told me this. She said, people are bad people to do things to you out there. She didn't travel. She just stayed at home. And that was why. Terrorism, we fear that. We fear economic unrest. I can raise my hand and say, I fear that. I don't like it when things go south economically. Death of a provider. Maybe you're in a family where the provider is the husband or wife, and then if they die, the provision is gone. Or intruders breaking into your house. Now, I realize here in the South, for most people, that's not a big deal because you just figure you pull your heater out and put some holes in them. But that's if you get the chance, right? Somebody comes in and intends to do harm, you may not get the opportunity to pull your heater out and put some holes in them. May not. So there are things that fear, we do fear. Just take, for instance, our own personal health. Do we not have some fears about that? That something might happen, some disease overtakes us? I mean, we fear it. These fears manifest in ways in which we live. For instance, we buy insurance. There's one that we're trying to work at a fear. We fear not being able to take care of something, so we buy insurance. Or we put up a fence. Or we arm ourselves in our home. So in all of these scenarios, we're trying to find a place where we can live in this world as followers of Jesus with some measure of contentment. It's interesting to me how much and I say this to myself, how much we talk about trusting the Lord, and yet how much we work at making sure that our lives are secured in very practical ways. I don't understand that. I'm not accusing anybody. I'm not saying it's bad. All I'm saying is that's curious to me, that we have that measure of insecurity, and yet we talk about trusting the Lord. But just imagine here what's going on. Just imagine what the church would be like if we didn't respond as David responds here to each other. How many times has it happened in a congregational setting where somebody said something and then somebody else heard it and they were offended, and the response is, I'll show you, I just won't come back. I'm out of here. I'll show you. David wants to live in contentment before the Lord. That's all he wants. He wants to be David, the militia man, the military man, the musician, and he wants to do it in contentment before God. Saul could have done that. Saul could have done that. He could have lived in contentment before the Lord, just obeyed him, but he chose not to. But here in this text, we see David, in his encounter with Nabal, seeking to carry out his own justice here. That's incredible to me. He's upset, and he's going to punish what he perceives as wrongdoing. Imagine if we did that. I mean, I'm glad it's not like some of these Western TV shows where somebody says something ugly and somebody else just stands up and takes a gun and blows their head off, right there on the spot. I mean, yeah, you said this about my wife, boom, and that solves your problem. Well, David's not far from that here. Not far at all. He's going to go and punish a wrong, which it was wrong what Nabal did, but he's going to punish it by a greater wrong. He's going to go kill people. I mean, you read what it says. Let the Lord punish me greatly if even one male servant of Nabal's is alive by morning. Now think about what that says. Who's going to be punished here? Nabal? I'm guessing Nabal's part of that group of people that are going to get slaughtered. I don't know. I guess so. Maybe he's going to leave Nabal alive and just ruin Nabal. What about Abigail? What about their children? What about the children of the servants? What about their wives? Of all the males who are going to be killed, who's going to take care of them? This is a bigger picture than just David being mad and going and yelling at somebody. This is somebody who has said something to David, and now David's going to go kill people over it. It's kind of like, and it's funny to me in the text, it says, one male left alive, which implies that David's not going to kill the women and children. Well, yay, David. You're really, I mean, it's kind of like Al Capone. One of the gangsters, I read a report from a gangster who had been in prison, and he wanted to show everybody how good he was. He said, I never, if they assigned for me to kill somebody less than 10 or over 80, I wouldn't do it. I thought, well, that's good. That's good that you're only willing to kill within the age range of 10 to 80. 11 to 79, all those people, they're fair game, but not 10, not below 10, and not over 80. And it seems like David's got the same kind of attitude here. I'm just going to kill all the guys. But that leaves a whole bunch of people left in destitution and hurting, and ruins all kinds of lives. Well, David is going to protect something here by doing this. He's protecting something. What's he protecting? What he thinks is his honor here. We've been slighted. I remember I worked for a contractor once who would not allow any of the people that worked for him, none of us could ever look at the house plans. Wouldn't let us see them. Because if we saw them, we didn't need him to come out there and tell us what to lay out and to build. He was protecting that sense of honor as the contractor, that I'm the only one that knows anything here. Well, think about what David's doing here with regard to Nabal. He's going to protect his honor, and he's willing to kill people to do it. He's willing to seek justice. Now, that seeking of justice is a very dangerous thing, but it's also subtle. How many times do we retaliate to somebody who says something to us that maybe we felt like, wow. I'll never forget this. This was one of the greatest lessons I ever got in how not to be. Terry and I were going to play a gig. I'll call it what it is, but we're going to play a musical gig at the golf course. And it was for some private affair. I think it was like a bank or something like that. Anyway, we were setting up, and a friend of mine from the church I was attending, a Sunday school teacher, she taught all kinds of things in the church, responsible for, this is a person that if you said her name in that church, everybody knew her. Well, she's also was a trained musician, and she had brought in some girls who were going to sing as a choir for this group of people before we started doing what we were doing during the dinner. We were dinner music. And so she got there, and apparently she had prearranged for there to be a piano in the room. No problem. She got there and said, "Where's the piano?" So she went to the maitre d' who was responsible for setting up the room and said, "Where's my piano?" And the maitre d' said, I don't know anything about a piano. She said, "Well, I arranged all this week. I was supposed to have a piano here. I've got to have a piano to do what we're going to do today. Don't you know that?" The guy said, "Well, I'm really sorry." He said, "Nobody told me." He said, "Let's go see if we can find you one." And she got mad with him and kept at him. And he turned to her and said, "Ma'am, I don't owe you anything." And she said out loud so that all of us in the room could hear, "I'll not be spoken to that way." I thought to myself, wow, that a person thinks of themselves such that other people have certain parameters within which they can speak to them. And if they exceed those parameters, they've done something wrong. And then I read about David and Nabal. Now think about that in terms of our congregation or any congregation. How many times is it just because somebody has said something that somebody seeks justice? Why are they seeking that justice? Because they've been wronged by something someone said. How different that is. How different we are from what Jesus told us. Jesus said this in Matthew chapter 5. Think about this in terms of what we're looking at here with David today. "If anyone forces you to go 1 mile, go with them 2. Now, that text in Matthew 5, and you can read it for yourself, is a historical text that has to do with a legal position in the Roman Empire. That's not just Jesus saying, be extra nice. You see, in the Roman Empire, if you were out minding your business on the Appian Way or one of the Roman roads, maybe you're out there with your 10 sheep in a cart, and the Romans came along and said, we have need of you. You were obligated in the Roman system to go with them, and you were obligated to go 1 mile. It was an obligation. It was a legal obligation. If the military commandeered you, you had an obligation to go with them wherever they were going for 1 mile. And Jesus says, don't just go the 1, go 2. Think about that in terms of what happens here with David and justice, and think about what it means for you and me when we're slighted by something someone says or does. There are people who unknowingly sometimes offend us and create in us a sense where we've got to have some kind of justice. All that is unforgiveness inside us. That's all it is. And it will cripple us from becoming like Jesus. That's all. If we can't be offended, if, as she said, I'll not be spoken to that way, or like David, he spoke to me and I'm going to go kill everybody, then we're going to be crippled in following the Lord. And people are going to see it. There was a survey I read, great survey. It was the 25 top things that this group of 6- and 7-year-olds said they do not like about adults. I thought, I want to read this. It's kind of David Letterman's top 10 list, that kind of thing. So I said, well, let me read this. Well, you know what the top 2 answers were? Think about this in terms of what we're thinking about with David here today. The top 2 answers of the 6- and 7-year-olds in the survey about what they did not like about adults. Grown-ups make promises. Then they forget all about them. Or else they say it wasn't really a promise, it was just a maybe. The second one's even better. Grown-ups don't do the things they're always telling us children to do, like pick up things, or be neat, or always tell the truth. Why is that? Well, because we're fallen. We're damaged people, and the damage comes out when we're trying to undo the damage. What we do with hurt is always going to dictate to a large degree whether or not we fail or succeed as followers of Jesus. Listen to Paul's words here. I love this text, although it's very difficult. Paul says this in Ephesians chapter 4. He says, you must let no unwholesome word come out of your mouth. Gosh, that's a lifetime's work all by itself, isn't it? But only what's beneficial for the building up of the one in need. There's another lifetime of work. That it will give grace to those who hear you. Do not grieve the Holy Spirit of God, by whom you were sealed for the day of redemption. You must put away every kind of bitterness, anger, wrath, quarreling, and evil, and slanderous talk. Instead, be kind to one another, compassionate, forgiving one another, and then he adds this tag, just as God in Christ forgave you. Think how different that description is from what David's about to do here with Nabal. How different that is. Think how different that is from how we are a lot of the time. There's a better way. I don't know where everybody is today, but if I've said